Welcome back, Ceramics 1. This is the demonstration for how to throw a cylinder. Your first lesson after learning how to center is throwing this 5-inch cylinder. Make sure that you watch the discussion video beforehand so you know the difference between your cylinder and your bowl and you know the answers for the test. Now, as we get started, you should have all the same things at your wheel. You should have a nice bucket of water. You should have your wooden rib that's only for shaping. It's not for cleaning the wheel. You should have your wire tool for cutting. And you might need a pin tool later. Okay, pin tools, make sure don't go in your bucket because you'll either stab your hand, and that really hurts, or you'll poke a hole in the bucket. You should also have your throwing sponge, which is going to be essential. Now, as you guys get started, I did my throwing demonstration for centering with a 4-pound ball of clay just so that you could see my hands and see how my hands were working a little bit better than a 1-pound ball of clay. All right, now as we get started, here's my 2-pound ball of clay, a nice big grapefruit size. This is too big. This is our 1-pound ball of clay. Just right. This is what you want when you're starting your cylinder, 1 pound. I'm going to use just a little bit more because I'm planning on cutting a bunch of it away for purposes of the demonstration. Okay, so as you get started, this is what you should have. You should have all the tools in your bucket. You should have your wheel nice and clean, ready to go, and we're going to start. Okay? So, start. Put your clay on your clean wheel head, squish it, pat it down into the center. Make sure your wheel is turning the right way for your handedness, whether it's right hand or left hand. All right? And here we go getting started. I'm going to turn my wheel on to centering speed. I'm going to get my hands wet, seal the bottom of my clay, and then I'm going to center. Brace position, elbows against my thighs, and I'm going to cone the clay up. Left hand over the top so I don't have any volcano syndrome. Get your hands wet, compress, right hand on top. Left hand on top, right hand around the side, and press down, compress that clay into the center. If your hands get dry or the clay gets dry, make sure to wet your hands again and center that clay down into the center. So there's my centered clay. You should cone 3 times. Okay, now as I do these next cones, I want to talk to you about the clay. You always want to be moving the clay, whether you're pulling the walls or you're centering. Do not give your clay a day at the spa and just massage it. And I'll show you what that looks like when we get to pulling our walls. But you want to be always moving your clay. When you're coning this clay, you're bringing the clay up from the bottom to the top and you're swirling it back down around the edge. So you're actually moving that clay. If you've got to cone your clay 7 or 8 times, your clay is going to get really gritty and sandy, and it's not going to be very nice. Okay? Now, when you center, the better you get, the quicker you can center, and the better you get, the more fluid motion you can make it. So if I think about centering, this is what I can do for just a quick center. I can go up, and I can almost not even wet my hands and come all the way back down and have a centered piece of clay when I'm done. You can kind of do it all in one quick, swift motion. Okay? Now, that's centering. If you need any review on centering, be sure to go watch that video. Now we're going to start our opening process. This is essential for making a cylinder. This is another answer on your test. To make a cylinder, the bottom of your cylinder should be flat. For a bowl, the bottom or floor should be curved. Those are 2 answers on your test. And I'm going to ask you to review that while you're in class and make sure you watch the video. Now, to open, you can, just like centering, there's a million different ways to open and you can do it any way you want. You can use your thumbs. You can use 1 thumb. You can use an index finger and thumb. You could use 2 index fingers. The only thing you shouldn't do is like this. You always want to be holding the outside edge of your clay to keep it in center. Okay, so here we go. I'm a index finger and thumb person. I like to take the right index finger, always lead with the dominant, and press it down gently with my thumb. And as I go in, the clay gets dry, so make sure you continue to get it wet. Now, when I press down, I'm going to press all the way down, and I'm going to hook my finger like a little hook, and I'm going to pull it flat across the floor. Okay? So I'm going to press my finger down all the way until I am 1/4 of an inch from the bottom of the floor. And this is where kids are like, huh? What's 1/4 of an inch? So we want the floor of our cylinder to be about this thick. So what you're going to do is you're going to stop your wheel. You're going to press your needle tool down in and measure it like this. You're going to hold the tip down to the bottom of the wheel head and your finger on the inside and pull it out and see how deep you are. Okay, so if I take this needle tool and I press it down into the center, I slide my finger all the way down the needle, I pull it out, and that's how much clay I've got left between the needle tip and my finger. That's about 1/4 of an inch. The first time you do this, you won't really know and have a good feeling of what that is. So use the needle tool and measure it. Once you're down 1/4 of an inch, and you're for sure about that, you don't have like 1/2 an inch or 3/4 of an inch, and you've got the base like this thick, you know, then you want to slow your wheel down just a bit, from centering speed to opening speed. This is where it gets tricky, because you do have to slow your wheel down now. Now I'm going to hold my fingers on the outside. I'm going to gently hook my finger and pull that cylinder open until I've got about 2 inches. Okay, whatever you need to do to get 2 inches. Here's a ruler. I've got rulers in the room. That's about 2 inches right there. I've got a little bit wider than 2 inches. All right? Now, I've got an undercut because I've pulled my finger like this and I've hooked it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this clay and I'm going to collar it back in. I'm going to take this clay and I'm just going to gently push it back in to get kind of like this rounded volcano-y shape here. And I've got this nice area on the inside. Okay? Now I'm going to do what's called compressing the floor. Okay? This floor right here, we've just taken these clay particles and separated them this way. And if you don't compress the floor, you get a crack right down the middle of your cylinder. So I'm going to pull the clay from the outside and press it back in towards the center and get rid of those cracks. So I'm going to take my 2 fingers from the right-hand side. I'm going to grab this clay on the right-hand side and pull from the edge into the center and squish that down nice and flat. I'm going to either call this compressing the floor or flattening the floor. And sometimes you can take a little nubbin out of there as you compress that floor. I like to compress 3 times. 3 is kind of my magic number. 1, 2, and my last time 3, and get it really nice and flat. Okay, now before I start my first pull, I'm going to compress the rim. I'm going to pinch my left hand around the rim, right index finger, and I'm just going to press down gently to flatten the rim out. Now we're all prepared. We centered, we opened, we flattened the floor, and we compressed the rim. 4 different things before you start pulling. Now we're going to start pulling. Okay? Whenever you're working on the wheel, you should be working between this like 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock area right-handers. Left-handers, you're going to be on the opposite side of the wheel between 9 o'clock and 6 o'clock. If you start working up here across the wheel head, you're just going to run into a lot of trouble. If you start and you're a right-hander and you start working on this side, your fingers are going to gouge into the clay. The clay should always be pulling through your fingers. Okay, so I'm always going to make sure that I'm working no higher than 3 o'clock right here. Okay? Starting. Butterfly hands. Dominant hand on the outside, right hand. Non-dominant on the inside. I'm going to give pressure with my outside hand, and I'm going to receive the pressure on the inside. So I'm going to pinch underneath, and I'm going to pinch on the inside, and I'm going to create that lump, and I'm going to pull slowly that lump all the way to the top. Now, I use my fingers. You can use your knuckle. You can use the sponge. I actually prefer to use the sponge, but I'm demonstrating with just my fingers so you can see that happen. Okay? Now, I've got this nice form, and you'll notice that as I was pulling, I was using my outside hand and pulling in towards the inside. So I've got this kind of volcano shape. It's not bellowing out like a bowl. Now, I've got this kind of janky looking rim up here. So I'm going to compress the rim. After every pull, compress that rim. I'm going to pinch and squish down and flatten that rim out nicely. Okay, now I'm going to move on to pull number 2. Pull number 2, I'm going to do the same thing. Make sure my hands are nice and wet. Butterfly hands, left hand on the inside, right hand on the outside, and I'm going to undercut with my outside hand and give pressure. Pinch with the inside hand and pull up carefully and slowly. Okay, and you can see how the clay is just on my inside middle finger and my outside fingers here. Okay, and that's where I'm giving pressure with the clay. Now, I've gotten done with pull number 2. I'm going to wet my hands and again compress my rim. Left hand pinch, right hand index finger squishing down. Now, I'm going to do one more pull. This time I'm going to use the sponge just to show you what that looks like. I hold the sponge here, so I've got like these fingers gripping it, and I've got these fingers, my index finger and middle finger on the outside to give pressure. I can touch on the inside and squeeze a little bit and get some water on the inside of my cylinder. And now, before I start, you've got a little bit of clay built up here. I'm going to grab that with my thumb and pull a little bit of chunk off there, which is going to allow me to get closer in down here to the base. Now I'm going to push this base in, pinching with the inside and the outside, and I'm going to pinch that clay and raise that clay all the way up to the top. Okay, now we've got our pretty good looking 5-inch cylinder here. Okay, I'm going to compress by pinching left hand, index finger right hand, and press that clay down again. Now, what you might have happen to you along the way is that this rim might get a little wonky here. So, 2 ways that you can trim your rim down. If you use a needle tool and you hold your finger on the inside and you gently touch the needle to the edge of the clay and you gently push through until you meet your finger and then quickly lift up, you can lift off that rim of clay. Let's say that there's no more needle tools because I don't know, for whatever reason, that's a bad day. You can also use your wire tool. Get it nice and small like you're going to floss your teeth with it, and you can hold it right along the edge of your rim, press down slowly and get to the right level, hold it there for a second, and then lift off that rim of clay. Okay, those are 2 ways to kind of straighten up the top if you run into an uncentered, wobbly top. Okay, now I'm going to do one more pull just to get the last of the clay out. And I'm going to press in and lift up that lump of clay nice and tall. Now this is taller than 5 inches. Okay, this clay right now is sitting at 6 inches. Okay, so we're going to stop there, but before you get done, this is what I'm going to be grading you on. I'm going to be grading you on that your whole cylinder is nice and solid and it's nice and centered. Then I'm going to be grading you on the following steps. You've taken your rib and you've slowed your wheel down, and this is part of the process I'm looking for. Slow your wheel down, and you're going to use your rib, point down, to compress this clay back down and get a nice straight wall so that at the end you've got a nice even cylinder. Now, the last step, this is called an undercut, and it looks like this. This is a mug with an undercut, and when we glaze our cups, we're going to wipe the glaze up to that undercut. The undercut looks like this. You've got your rib, you hold your rib flat on your wheel, and you use just the tip to slide underneath. Undercut like that. And you should pull out a little chunk of clay. Okay? Now this is a 5-inch cylinder done. At the end, make sure you take your sponge and you wipe the inside of it. You should be able to fit your whole hand inside. Okay, it shouldn't be like this little teeny thing about that big that you can barely get a finger in. All right, that's a F-, right? Now, part of this is to get the final grade for your 5-inch cylinder, you're going to take your wire tool and you're going to cut it off. You're going to cut halfway through and you're going to lift it up. And then you're going to take that cylinder and we'll open it up. And we should be able to see here a nice 1/4 of an inch floor, a 1/4 of an inch wall all the way up. It should be nice and thin at the bottom and nice and thin at the top. Okay? Now, as you clean up, make sure you put the clay into the right bucket. Make sure you totally wipe everything like we've talked about in class, or I'll be docking you studio maintenance points, and make sure that everything gets put away. Now this, make sure I put it into the grade book because we don't fire this one. It's just a formative assessment. Okay? Now that's how you throw the 5-inch cylinder, and that's the first project on the wheel. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in class.